Welcome. We're absolutely delighted that you're all here tonight to hear about the Deer Run Nature Preserve, and it seems to be growing in scope, and we're having lots of fun working on it and lots of success. And so through the evening, we want to share with you a lot of the stuff that we've learned. We could never share it in an evening, but we felt it was really time that we were making so much noise and people were wondering about it, so it was time to get everybody together and have a meeting like this. And it is being videotaped, so it'll be on BCTV. So I want to really welcome you all, and I want to turn it over to Sam Farwell, who's been working very hard on this.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to describe sort of the land we're talking about, and also what a group of people have gotten started, how we've gotten organized, and then there will be other speakers who will have other aspects of this to talk about. But again, thank you for coming. I'm Sam Farwell, and I've been working very closely with Mary Ellen and Ed Anthes to really get the ball rolling on how to conserve what we're talking about, 287 acres in the northwest corner of Dummerston, currently owned by Alex Wilson and his brother, and he walked in and handed us a signed purchase and sale agreement, so that's what we've achieved as of today. We'll get back to that. The land is that rectangle right there in red. It's on top of Putney Mountain. A lot of people are familiar with the top of Putney Mountain Road and the hike that's around here, and familiar with the entire ridge that the Putney Mountain Association has got a lot of conserved lands on. But because it's called Putney Mountain, a lot of people may not realize that the mountain runs right up to the West River. And the ridge continues and has a very dramatic stop at the river valley, right at the town line. And that high ground is what the Wilson parcel mostly covers. Also, we can see in this map sort of the way in Vermont we try to, we do our patchwork land conservation. We've got this huge protected land in the middle of the state, and then private enterprises, different landowners doing different things. And a lot of people are working on wildlife corridors and thinking about how animals move from one area to another, and trying to see how we can patchwork protected lands together so that actually animals that need to move long distances can. There's a lot of undeveloped land that isn't green on this map. When you actually look at an ortho photo, you can see that, but these are most of the lands that are actually have conservation easements on them. So that is something we want to do with this parcel here. A little bit about that, the history of that land. It's been in the Wilson family for at least 40 years, a couple of generations. And before that was owned by Elizabeth Whitney, who was the heiress to the Eli Whitney fortune, and came up with Katherine Ewing, who started Camp Arden, which is also right down here at the end of Camp Arden Road, in the 20s. And eventually she bought the Deer Run farm for herself in the 40s. So she held it for about 40 years, and then the Wilsons for about 40 years, and essentially protected it from development all that time. As a matter of fact, Alex's father, Alex is here tonight, had the option of not purchasing that parcel. He first purchased the house and fields. The person who inherited Elizabeth Whitney's land subdivided it, and eventually Conrad wanted to protect that land, so he did purchase the 287 acres. held it. So that's how we have it still undeveloped. Also the fact that it's incredibly steep and high helped. But in 1800 it was probably all sheep pasture. So it was developed at one point. Enough history. What I find particularly compelling about this spot, partly I own land there, but I love the way the West River is forced to go around Putney Mountain. We generally think of the West River as traveling northwesterly, but it's flowing down and it hits this end of the Putney Mountain Ridge, and it is forced to do a hard right where Grassy Brook comes down along the bottom of that ridge, and then it has to flow around this very steep, high, rocky mountain, and when it joins with the Rock River, it gets to take a left and come around back to where it wanted to be and continue on its route. And the mountain just sticks out there in its path, and it's a very steep climb, and when you get to the top it's quite exhilarating, and there are quite, particularly this time of year, some great views. I think we'll see some good photographs of that later. As I think, the other thing that we all find compelling about it is that it is another patch in the patchwork. When we think about wildlife traveling, and from the Connecticut River to the Green Mountains, there's not a lot around there. And as we get into the evening, we'll talk about what comes after this one parcel, and there are more parcels that abut this. So let's go to the next slide. So this is the close-up on an orthophoto. This is the actual parcel we're talking about. Mary Ellen and Ed own a small abutting parcel, and myself, I have an abutting parcel as well that goes down to the West River. I don't know how well you can read this, but that's 425 acres plus or minus. That's when you add in what Mary Ellen and Ed would conserve and what I would conserve as part of this project, so that we would actually then have a complete watershed from the top of the mountain at 1,500 feet or so down to the river. You can see this one brook, the entire drainage would be included. So to me, that's a nice feat. In order to do this, obviously we need to raise funds. So what we've done is we now have a nonprofit organization, a 501c3, to use as a vehicle. As it turned out, there was one available. The Green Mountain Conservancy had kind of fallen into disuse, and they were very happy to let us rejuvenate the board with ourselves. The mission was very similar. It was a land conservation mission, and so we now are the Green Mountain Conservancy, along with Patty Smith. We are the board members, and we are using that to apply for grants, to raise funds, and to make the purchase. We have been, we are in the process of applying to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board for funds. In order to do that, we need to generate a budget, which would not just be the purchase price, but the funds needed for annual maintenance, taxes, and any other annual costs. We are also talking, there are many organizations that we are reaching out to. The High Meadows Fund. We have been, with the help of Kelly Price, who can't actually be here tonight, but is the Windham County Game Warden, is very familiar with the land and loves to hunt there every year. He has put us in touch with the Fish and Wildlife. They will be coming down and having a hike on the land with us in a couple of weeks. And of course the Vermont Land Trust, Joan Weir is here tonight from the Vermont Land Trust, and she'll talk later, but she's been extremely supportive and put in a lot of time already in helping us, working with myself and Ed and Mary Ellen on our conservation pledge to put in a conservation easement. So it's great to have that support. It's great to have the interest. We hope to generate interest from other organizations as well. Now, that's what we're focusing on right now. However, as it turns out, the Mercedes family that just offloaded Maple Valley also owns all of this. Their home base was Winchester Stables, which is here. They'd like to offload that too. And it is 630 acres. There are a couple of parcels included in this yellow that are owned by a couple of other families. And we are optimistic in our conversation with them. They are absentee owners. I think this would be the right time for them to join a conservation project. But this is all what we're calling phase 2 because you can only do so much at a time. But we're very excited because that would be the entire mountain in a sense. And that would be over 1,200 acres in one block, covering from the top of the mountain to the river with about 3.5 miles of river frontage. Has anyone else seen a place like that in Windham County? To me, I don't know why anyone would not be interested in that. It seems very compelling for water quality issues, wildlife. It's like the patchwork map shows, you don't have a lot of large blocks. So we have been in conversation with the Mercedes family. They're very interested. We'll need more funds during phase 2. This is just what Google can show you. I tried to get as much of the 3D effect as I could, but again, I like it because it shows how the river comes down. Grassy brook is running at the bottom of this steep ridge, and it hits this lump of rock and has to come around. And here's where the Rock River comes in, and it gets to come around and head back towards Brattleboro. But it's quite a dramatic bend. The other thing that's dramatic, as you can see, is the crisscross of power lines, which is both an opportunity and a challenge. But we don't think it detracts from the value of the land at all. I guess I can outline what we're talking about here as far as the lands that would be protected.
Sam, point to Camp Arden Road.
Yep. Camp Arden Road is coming along the river and crosses this power line and turns up here past this field and comes right between these two fields and hooks around to this homestead and stops. So the land that would be in conservation would be down here at the river, coming up to these fields, and then the Wilson parcel we're talking about runs right up. I'm doing the best I can.
That's close.
And comes over the top of the mountain, runs behind, and down about like this. Oh, I got disoriented. Coming down like this. Yep. Okay. Now all of this is what excites me very much, but I can't talk about it too much. But I really think that shows you what a grand piece of land, undeveloped, worth preserving it is. Okay, we're going to try and keep it kind of brief. Have I missed?
No.
Okay.
Your mic when you're done.
Okay, so Ed Anthony is going to follow me. He's got a little more interesting details about the land, things that he's seen and photographed, followed by Patty Smith with more, Patty Smith who actually authored the Dummerston Biodiversity Report when she was a resident of Dummerston and on the Planning Commission. So she has her observations to offer. Kelly Price, like I said, was going to be here but got called away on work. Hector Galbraith, who lives on Camp Hardin Road and is an ornithologist himself and has lots of information. He probably won't share all of it about the birds that live on Putney Mountain. And Roger Haydock, who, again, a Dummerston resident who is leaving a legacy of I don't know how many miles of hiking trails in Windham County, but he's been logging many hours on Putney Mountain on this land, and he has he'll share what he's been doing. And Joan Weir will talk a little bit about how the Vermont Land Trust is involved, and then Mary Ellen will talk about how important community support is, where we're going to go from here, and we'll open it up. Anybody can say anything they want, because I see that there are a lot of people here who know this land very well already.
I'm going to give you a different perspective on the land. If you're going up Route 30, going by the covered bridge, straight ahead of you, this is the hillside that we're talking about.
Ed, do you want me to do that?
No, that's okay.
Press button 3?
So next time you're going up that way, take a close look. Part of the importance of this, besides for wildlife, is for all of us who are driving up that way, because it forms the view shed for us and for all the people who come visiting in Windham County. And once you're up there, if the clouds aren't too thick, you can look back down and see the covered bridge. So you can see a wire there, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. You can also see Black Mountain when the leaves are off the trees. There's a lot of water up there. If you go by this time of year, you'll see a lot of water coming down, but this whole area, the 287 acres of the Wilson parcel, holds a lot of water, as well as draining that part of the mountain. So this is a beaver pond that's on the land. There are a lot of vernal pools. We've identified at least 6 of them so far. Here's some spotted salamander eggs. So we've identified the species that are needed in a body of water for you to say that it's a vernal pool, as well as that it goes away in the dry season, so there aren't fish there to eat the eggs. There are 2 or 3 major streams that come down, and then there are a lot of rivulets that are only flowing when there's a lot of water around. The power line takes up about 10 acres, or about a little under 4% of the total land area. It's used by birds for nesting and for browsing, and Hector will talk about that some more. It's used by all the mammals as a travel corridor, and it's used by bears for marking and leaving whatever messages they leave there. They don't just do it on the telephone poles, although you'll see it on a lot of the telephone poles. They also leave their marks on the barks of beech trees. And these bear-scarred beeches are very important to the state to show the environmental value of the area. And if you can't find the marks on the trees, you may find some other leavings that the bears have left behind. And you might notice in the lower one on the right-hand side, this bear was either going down to Hannaford's or raiding somebody's compost pile.
What is that, Ed?
It's a sticker from a piece of fruit. And there are all kinds of mammals that taking advantage of the cavities in the trees. It's beautiful, and every time of year we've taken probably dozens of people up now, and people are always struck by how beautiful it is in many parts of it all throughout the year. This area is near this is at the top at about 14 or 1,500 feet in elevation. And there are a lot of hemlock and deer wintering yards that are state recognized in this parcel. And at the summit, there's something that Sam's been calling the monument. There's this square object of laid up rocks. It's about 3 feet high and about 6 feet on the side. And we've mentioned it both to the state archaeologist when he was down here doing a talk, as well as to some local Abenaki people, and they're all quite interested in trying to figure out what that might be. There's a very rich diversity of life. Although we assume it was grazed completely during the sheep craze. It hasn't been. The trees have been growing up for a long time now, and so there are a very rich soil life. I think these mushrooms are the fruiting bodies of something called green stain. And just everywhere you look, whether you look high or low, there's something really intriguing. And one of the characteristics of old forests like this are that they have trees on the ground, they have logs that are decaying, that are adding to the mycorrhizal soil life, providing places to live for all the insects that are at the beginning end of the food chain.
So I really know this property from a visit I paid one afternoon almost 10 years ago when I got permission from Alex to do an on-the-land exploration as part of the Dummerston Biodiversity Conservation Planning Project. Next. And I'm tempted to turn this particular slide over to Roger, but I won't. So when you're trying to do a biodiversity inventory for an entire town, you need to figure out not what the particular needs of each species are, but what are the elements that will protect all species through a much broader lens. So in this particular case, this is the parcel we're talking about, right up here in the corner. And this is what I call the central highlands of Dummerston, so it includes Black Mountain. And of course, we know already that we've got some very interesting elevation on this parcel, and that is, believe it or not, really important for wildlife. Surficial deposits, that is what is on the ground. And here we have mostly glacial till, of course, left over from the passing of the Great Glacier. But right here, this cool little green blob is a came terrace. Roger, could you say a word about a came terrace?
So a came terrace is a deposit made by a melting glacier. And when the glacier was melting away here maybe 15,000 years ago, the last place to melt out was not the high mountains. It was in the river valleys. Why did it melt out last in the river valleys? Because those are lower in elevation. You'd think they were warmer. It's because the valleys, by being deep, created more volume of ice that could be there, and that bigger volume of ice was slower to melt out than what was up on the hillsides. So, if we think of the West River Valley as just going down here, and my arm is the ice that's stuck in the valley, right, with hills on either side, as the ice, which is very dirty, contains a lot of sands and gravels and boulders, melts out in the summertime, some of that melting material gets jammed up against the hillsides, along with erosion bringing material down from the hillsides too, because there's not much vegetation. And so a came terrace forms of sands and gravels along the edge of the ice. Eventually the ice melts away, and those came terraces are left behind. Sometimes they're absolutely tabletop flat, like up on Leonard Road, near where Alex Wilson lives. It's just absolutely flat. In other places, the came had been formed on ice itself, and when the ice melted, even though the came originally was flat, because the ice melts away, the came is sloping, and that's what you'd see up here. This came terrace up here, where are we?
Yeah,
up here, it's sloping. It's not flat. It started out flat. So that's a came terrace.
Oh, thank you. I knew I should turn it over to Roger for that part. He's so good. So what that means on the ground, and do you want to talk also, we have some pebbly sand and lakeshore deposits right here.
Oh, yes.
That's
Now,
good too.
when the ice disappeared, that wasn't the end of the story. You turn to the next chapter. What happens when ice melts? Turns to water. And yes. And so when the ice was melting, as it melted back to the north, right, this area no longer had ice in it, but it still existed in the northern part of the state and eventually up at the Canadian border. If you think of the Connecticut River Valley today, here's Hartford, down here. St. Johnsbury's way up here. It's several hundred feet higher in St. Johnsbury than it is in Hartford. But when the ice still existed in the north, it was so heavy, like somebody sitting on a cushion, it depressed the Earth's crust so that from Hartford to St. Johnsbury was flat, and there was a glacial deposit south of Hartford in Rocky Hill, Connecticut, that dammed up the valley and created Glacial Lake Hitchcock, which extended all the way from south of Hartford up ultimately to St. Johnsbury. And this whole Connecticut River Valley was flooded, and the tributary valleys like the West River here in Dummerston was flooded. And so this was a fjord arm of Glacial Lake Hitchcock. Eventually, the ice kept moving further north up into Quebec, and just like when somebody gets off a couch, the cushion rebounds. The Connecticut River once again had a gradient. The dam south of Hartford, Connecticut, no longer held a lake, and so now the Connecticut River flows in the river valley again, but it's left behind all of these shoreline deposits, deltas where streams had flowed into it, or beaches, that kind of thing. And to the eye, if you see them, they look flat. But in fact, because they were laid down flat when the land was like this, but now the land slopes like that, these shoreline features slope slightly upwards to the north at about 4 feet to the mile. So you find those all along the edge of the West River and all up the Connecticut River Valley, and where stream deltas were flowing into Glacial Lake Hitchcock, they're often mined for sand and gravel today.
So when we're thinking about conserving land for all of the species that live here, we need a variety of different soil types, we need a variety of elevations. So these are all some of the filters that conservation planners use to think about which parcels to target. One of the most important things, of course, if you're thinking about the most habitat for the most species, is the largest parcels. And this is a map that was produced by Jeff Nugent showing the places that are most remote from human activity. So the darker the green, the farther from people. And we're getting into some pretty far from people up here. And this is an oldish project. So this was before this parcel was subdivided. And it was a 302-acre parcel that already made the light bulb go off in my head. Okay, that's a big parcel in a remote place. That could be potentially important for conservation if we're thinking through the lens of what wildlife need. And if we're thinking about connectivity, not only does it connect up Putney Mountain, but, and let's just switch to the next one. Wildlife can follow the green trail right through here, Prospect Mountain, and down into Black Mountain. And this is the part that I think is actually most important. I think this is a really critical crossing of Route 30 right here, where you have the Rock River Bridge, and animals can travel across the river and under Route 30 at that point and access all these big wild lands connecting to, and I wish I had Sam's 3D map, but switch to the next one, Ed. See where the power lines cross? That's where we're talking about. So this is Putney Mountain coming down through here, crossing here into this big wild area that connects up to the Green Mountain National Forest, that Sunset Lake. So that's the sort of the big picture. So those are some of the things you learn remotely. And then when it's time to get out in the field and see what's actually there and confirm your suspicion that this is an important parcel, the first thing you encounter is this big power line. But the big power line turned out to be very interesting. One of the things Vermont has an awful lot of is forest. And one of the things we no longer have a lot of is early successional shrub habitat. And, you know, power lines are actually really good at maintaining this habitat that is very useful for a number of different kinds of birds. Next picture, Ed. You're going to find, obviously, a completely different suite of plants under a power line than you find in the forest. So overall, diversity is increased. Your picture was better. So the bears love power lines. Power lines are kind of unusual early successional shrub habitat in that they're often located far from other types of human disturbance. So a bear can be on a power line way up in the mountains and feel completely safe and gorge itself on blackberries and raspberries. And they will use this habitat a lot, especially in late summer for feeding on berries. Okay, bobkitty tracks. Other things that live in this early successional and meadow habitat are meadow voles, which reproduce like crazy and feed a lot of bobcats. It's also excellent habitat for cottontail rabbits. So bobcat, you can go to the next one because anyone that knows me knows I'm crazy about beavers. And this is a beaver pond that has been vacated for many years, I think. When's the last time? Yeah.
When my boys were young, I used to take them up there to see the beavers, and we named them Billy.
Oh, nice.
And it was probably until they were about 10, 11 years old. And then he moved down by the river for several years.
Uh-huh.
And then I didn't see him again.
So this particular beaver pond is actually on that Came Terrace, I think. So it's really well-drained soil. It's nice to have water held there for a while and create some wetland habitat on what would otherwise be really well-drained substrate. From here, if you walk back into the woods, there is a really nice vernal pool and well, actually, go back. I need to talk more about beavers for just a minute because beavers are really amazing at holding water in a place and raising the water level underground and creating wetland habitat for all kinds of creatures. Like you're going to find kingbirds nesting in there. You're going to find, of course, herons and all kinds of amphibians. Out in that power line, I found a couple of unusual reptiles when I was surveying. A green snake, beautiful little bright green snake, a Decay's brown snake. So overall, And although it does allow invasive species up into unfragmented forests, cowbirds, raccoons are going to be more likely to be moving up through there, so it's not so good for forest nesting birds. I'm going to tentatively give this an overall bonus for this parcel, and partly because it doesn't continue on up through Putney Mountain and the big chunks of unfragmented forest, but then dives down to go along the river. So I think it really offers some strong benefits to the area, depending on how it's managed. And that's something that the Green Mountain Conservancy is thinking about already. If it's not being treated with herbicides, then it could be a great habitat, sort of in, as long as we're dependent on.
Velco are here, and it's not being treated with herbicide.
That's wonderful. Okay, now we can go to the next one, because I just want to point out this little drainage right here creates a nice steep little chasm. So the next picture, there's this wonderful mossy area, and if you look over the edge, it's this nice steep tumbly cliff, which is habitat for my second favorite animal, porcupines. It's great little porcupine nesting site, and you can see, or denning site rather, they've really been enjoying these hemlocks that grow there. Now moving up higher, this is a vernal pool up near the summit that has buttonbush growing in it, and it's the only place I found buttonbush in Dummerston, but I hear other people know where there are other spots. Okay, shagbark hickory, a little unusual. This was one of my favorite spots on the property, and it's a lousy photograph, I apologize. But it's a dry oak forest on the ridge that extends out into Brookline. Now, I had to call it a dry oak forest community because that's the best classification I could come up with, but it was really not especially dry and really lush, grassy, sedgy, ferny understory. So a little atypical that way, but really beautiful, beautiful forest. And so once you're on the ground, then you can start mapping the different natural communities. And this is quite a diverse array of communities up here in this parcel, including this nice dry oak forest and also in the report some of the species level elements that we've talked about already. These are rare species, and these are both, I think, federally endangered. The three-bird orchid, federally threatened. Bar-bristled bulrush up there. Has that been found on this parcel or just across on the Putney side?
Yeah, we haven't found it yet.
I think it's found right up here in these wetlands. And this is the early successional shrub habitat. This is all a state delineated deer wintering area, but the ones that were confirmed are, it doesn't show up too well here, these darker hemlock areas. In my final analysis of these parcels in Dummerston, this is information I presented to the Conservation Commission with landowners and the features I found on their properties. And you can see this parcel right here has got quite a long list and really was a standout parcel to me at the completion of the whole town-wide inventory as a conservation priority.
When we began thinking about trying to set this land aside for conservation, I think most of us realized that it'd be a really good idea to have some sort of biological inventories of the plants and wildlife present on the site. And so Kat Abbott and I, and Kat lives up on Purple Mountain Road, I think, just above. She's looking down on the parcel. Kat Abbott and I decided to get out and do some work on birds, because Kat and I do birds. We don't do mammals, we don't do invertebrates, we don't do any of that stuff. We do birds. So we decided to go out and take a quick look at the bird communities. Now, there's in no way are the results that I'm going to present, no way should they be taken as a comprehensive or exhaustive inventory of the birds that live on the parcel. It was a survey that we put together with very limited time and limited resources just to get a preliminary or drive-by idea of what the bird communities are like on the parcel. So Kat and I spent a few days up there in the late summer looking at the bird communities. In total, to get to the punchline, we found just over 60 species on the parcel. Now, if we had done a year-long comprehensive survey, I think we'd be looking at more like 80 or perhaps even 90 species. So the bird community is pretty diverse for Vermont. I think Vermont's state bird list is only about 220, 230. So we got a big chunk of Vermont's list. Now, the reason it's diverse up there is because of the mix of the habitats. And there are two main habitats in particular that are important for the birds. There's forest, and people have talked about the forest already. Interspersed within the forest, small wetlands, and that's important, I'll get back to that. And also there's the power line cuts. This scrub here, does anyone know what these scrubs are? Is this willow? Patty, do you know?
There is willow.
It's willow? Yeah.
Patch, yes.
Yeah. So when you look at the bird community we found, and you try to make sense of the different species, what you find is that the birds are keying in on these two main communities. There's a block of birds, a group of birds, which live in the forest, breed in the forest, and there's another smaller group of birds which live in the scrub habitats. It may be a smaller group in the scrub habitats, but it's quite an important group, as I'll show you. So I think the next one is a bird slide. Yeah, this is a wood thrush. This is one of the forest birds. And the reason I've got it up here is because it's a dwindling species in Vermont. It's getting into a parlous state. I'm not quite sure anyone knows why, but there's not as many wood thrushes around as there used to be. There's plenty of them on the parcel. You go up there in a spring morning, early June, you'll hear lots of wood thrushes singing. So that's a forest bird. Next one. Even better. Okay, where are the hawk watchers? Come on, John, what is this?
It's a hawk.
See, if it's not flying, he doesn't know what it is. This is a red-shouldered hawk. And again, this is a species which is not common in Vermont. In fact, it's gotten so uncommon, it's now listed by the state as a species in greatest need of conservation. It's a forest bird, but it's typically only found in wet forests, where there are vernal pools and small swamps. It lives on amphibians taken from those pools. And it's very hard to find. If you got there most of the year, it will be there, certainly in the summer and spring. But unless you're there in the early spring, like in late March, early April, you probably won't see it or hear it. But at that time, late March, early April, the birds are very vocal. They display over the canopy top, calling loudly. And the call carries for, a mile. You can hear these birds displaying. Well, I won't try to imitate it, but it sounds rather like a gull. It's like a gull flying over the forest. So that's red-shouldered hawk. Next one, please. This one's flying. You must know what it is. I don't believe any of this hawk watch data now. This is a broad-winged hawk. And it's much more common in this forest than red-shouldered. I mean, you're not tripping over them, but there are quite a lot of broad-winged hawks up there nesting in the forest. Summer visitor comes in the spring and leaves about September time. Now, those are forest birds. The two hawks are and the wood thrush are forest birds. And they're great. It's nice to have those birds around. But it's when you step out into the scrub that you start to see birds that really arouse attention in birders and ornithologists. This is one. This is a male mourning warbler. Arrives in the spring, breeds in scrub. So its ancestral habitat is probably the scrub surrounding wetlands and ponds. But over the years, these birds have realized that the scrub surrounding power line cuts is just as good. So why don't we nest there? And for a couple of years, one of these was singing in the power line cut going through the parcel. Hopefully it'll be there next year as well. We only found one, but interesting bird. This is the prairie warbler, which is a specialist on scrub habitats. Getting pretty unusual in Vermont. There used to be a small colony up near Saxon's River, but it's disappeared now. This is the only place, in our, at least in Windham County anyway, let's say in southern Vermont, where I know to find prairie warblers. Again, it's listed by the state as a species being in greatest need of conservation. It's a specialist, specialises in shrub habitats, and it's got a little insect-like buzzy song. And if you go up there in June, you'll hear these birds singing. There's lots of them in the power line cuts. Next, please. Brown thrasher, a species that at one time, 30, 40 years ago, was a lot commoner in New England than it is now. But for some reason, brown thrashers have been tanking all over New England, and they're hard to find. There's the ones on the parcel we're talking about. You can also find them down at Vernon and across at Hinsdale, but they're in isolated little patches. They're no longer widespread birds. And part of the reason for that is because the scrub habitats that they like have just grown up. It's now forest. And there's not so much habitat for brown thrashers. And my favourite is field sparrow. Notice a little pink bill in the eye ring that distinguishes it from other sparrows. Again, it's a scrub specialist. I don't know if this is a species of greatest conservation need, but if not, it should be, because they are pretty rare.
Name again, Hector?
Sorry?
Say the name again.
Field sparrow. Yeah, the name, they don't just live in fields, they live in old field habitats. They don't live in closely cropped fields like savanna sparrows do. They live in fields which have been not grazed or cut for a couple of years, and the shrubs are so high, or they live in power line cuts. But they're not common at all in Vermont. But there's lots on the power line cut. They've got this funny little bouncing ball song, and you go up there in the summer, you'll hear field sparrow singing all over the cuts. That might be the last. Is that the last one? So I think the take-home message from the first take-home message from the bird inventory is it ain't complete. It was, as someone who used to be a professional ornithologist, I'm embarrassed at how much effort we put into it. We should have put a lot more comprehensive, exhaustive effort into it. We didn't have the time, but we did come out of it with a couple of important messages. One of them was that the bird community on this parcel is particularly rich because of the mixture of habitats. There are important, significant species in the forest habitat, which is predominant on the site, but the really important birds on the site, from a conservation point of view, live in the scrub habitat under the power lines. And this community is in very short supply in the rest of Vermont, indeed in New England.
Okay, well that looks like a shot of me out on the land. And this fall, I started to look to lay out a trail on this property. And when I do that, what I do is I go through the woods repeatedly using different colored surveyor ribbons to mark out plausible trail segments, okay? And I spent 100 hours doing this, creating a whole network of possibilities, from which I then select the best combination, or what I think is the best combination, to make what will be a really very pleasant trail. It starts down on Camp Arden Road, crosses the power line, and then it goes in a big zig way over here, crosses this power line, comes up, has a very pretty view there, then crosses here into a lovely hemlock woods, and then through some beautiful coves of hardwoods and hemlocks to get to the summit, where there's also a view. When I lay out a trail, what am I looking for? Well, the first two things I look for as I go into the woods, and that I want to be really careful to uphold as a principle, is safety. The trail should be safe. You don't want to be scrambling up slippery cliffs. and drainage. A trail, if it's built to drain properly, is going to involve far less maintenance. So safety and drainage are your two inviolable principles that you need to follow. And then after that, I'm solving to try to make it not too steep, because that allows a larger number of potential hikers to come and enjoy the land. So if it's steep, some people won't like it, but if it's not so steep, people who are out of shape won't quite feel that painful feeling of lactic acid building up, you know. Let's see. I try to lay out the trail so it's not too hard to construct, okay? So you don't want to have too many engineering challenges. You want it to be easy to maintain. And then what I tried ultimately to do, once I've gone through all these engineering hurdles, is I want a trail that can be as beautiful as I can make it. And so what I've done here is try to connect some of the pretty places that I've discovered as I walked across this land and just connect the trail from them. So we cross streams, they're pretty. We go up a beautiful open oak woodland here. Then we come across to a spectacular view from the power line down to Black Mountain and to the covered bridge. Then we cross into a cathedral-like hemlock grove, and then go up this cove here that has some really tall, impressive hardwoods. It really feels like you're in a cathedral. And then finally you get to the summit. By meandering around, connecting all the pretty places, which is going to be aesthetically beautiful, I also am making a longer trail to climb the 950 feet elevation gain from the bottom all the way to the top. And as you remember from geometry, if it takes you a longer trail to climb the same elevation, it's less steep. So I'm solving for two goals at the same time. Less steepness and more beauty is accommodated by making the trail have some switchbacks. So in trail design, you're always looking for ways to kill two birds with one stone. Another thing that really I try to solve for is if you go along the shoulder of a ridge, you're getting more beauty because you're getting a sense of 3 dimensions, and you're getting better drainage because you're right on the edge. So again, you're killing two birds with one stone. So this would be a really pretty trail. It would be about 2 miles up. It's maybe 8.5% average grade. And to give you a sense of what does that mean, well, those who go up the pinnacle from the east side on the Holden Trail, that's a 5.3% grade. So this is a bit steeper than that. But 8.5 or 9% is about what the Town Line Trail is on the pinnacle on the west side there. So it would be a lovely trail, about 2 miles up, 2 miles back. I did originally try to see if I could do a loop, but it's just so steep on this east side, it just didn't really work. That wasn't a workable idea. So that's what the trail will be when it's built. And I had a great deal of fun doing it, and I look forward to working on it, and also with help of other people. All right.
Can you tell us about the rocks?
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, if you notice here, you'll see these trees sort of have a bit of grain to them. That's because they're following the bedrock. And if you go further north up this ridge, up to the pinnacle and in Westminster West or up to Putney Mountain, the rocks dip downwards to the east, okay? But as you come further down here, Black Mountain's to the south, and 380 million years ago, this was an active area, and Black Mountain shot upwards as red-hot magma, and it so bent the rocks that although they started out dipping this way, down here, they're now dipping almost vertical. So Black Mountain has come through and just taken these rocks and done this to them. So the rocks are almost vertical because Black Mountain down here, as part of a huge folding and magma intrusion event, distorted these rocks compared to what they are further north on the same ridge.
Hi, everybody. What an interesting evening. I've learned a lot about these very interesting properties. My name is Joan Weir, and I work with the Vermont Land Trust. I've been with the Land Trust for about 20 years, working throughout Windham County. and I work out of our Brattleboro office, and generally work with landowners on all types of land. Work on farmland, managed woodland, recreational land, natural habitat, open space land that's important to a community. And I periodically do get involved with projects like this that involve a section of a town or a neighborhood. And as you might expect, these types of projects are a little bit more challenging, many more moving parts, with landowners having different interests, needs, and concerns. Regardless, it's still possible to move ahead with conservation on projects or on lands like this. We achieve conservation through a legal document called, loosely called a conservation easement, and a couple people have talked about conservation easements tonight. Its official title is a grant of development rights and conservation restrictions. It's a legal agreement between the landowner and the Vermont Land Trust. It's a document that's recorded in the town offices. It runs with the land, so no matter who owns the property, the conservation easement stays with that deed. So the landowner is the grantor, the Vermont Land Trust is the grantee, and the landowner essentially is giving up his or her development rights and committing to permanent restrictions on the property. So what can you do and what can't you do when there's a conservation easement in place? We're not dealing with farmland in this situation, but if we were, you could continue to use your farmland. You can manage for timber, for wildlife habitat. You can decide whether or not you want people to hunt on your land or recreate on your land. These are all things that are permitted with a conservation easement. What you can't do would be commercial activities, industrial activities, mining. Those would be the types of things that would not be allowed. New buildings would not be allowed except for agricultural or forestry purposes. The land can't be further subdivided. So these are the restrictions we're talking about. And any future house sites would have to be negotiated up front in advance of putting the conservation easement in place. So the details of what goes into a conservation easement is essentially negotiated between each individual landowner and the land trust. The land trust then annually visits the properties and schedules contact with landowners to essentially check to see that the easement is being upheld over time. So there's a perpetual nature to these conservation easements. So how will these conservation easements work on the properties that you all have been learning about tonight? In the case of the Wilson land, which is roughly 287 acres. So I think you heard earlier that the Green Mountain Conservancy is currently under contract with the Wilson brothers to acquire that land. And in order to buy the land, the Green Mountain Conservancy is going to be going to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board to get a grant to help with the acquisition. If they're successful, a condition of that grant will be that the land will have to be conserved and the conservation easement held by a third party. That's where the Vermont Land Trust comes into play in that situation. So that's essentially how the conservation easement will sort of go into place for the Wilson land should everyone be successful in getting the grant and raising all the other funds necessary to cover all the costs to move ahead. There's also some discussion regarding Mary Ellen and Ed's land here, and then the Farwell property to the south of that. What we've been talking about there is a donation of a conservation easement by both of those families. So again, the net result is a conservation easement. That legal document is used and recorded and placed on the property. But those are considered donations from the landowner to the Vermont Land Trust. So the conservation easements come into play kind of in different ways, but I think that as far as what we're talking about here, as I described, that's how, if we're all successful, how that will be achieved. The one advantage for anyone interested in donating a conservation easement, that there can be some possible income tax benefits, and so a private individual may benefit from that action in terms of their charitable intent. So that's something that may be of interest to the private landowners, the Mary Ellen, Ed, and the Farwells, and other neighbors that may get involved with this project. I've brought some handouts in the back that provide a lot more details about what's in a conservation easement and the tax benefits of donating a conservation easement. It's not an easy topic to necessarily kind of wrap your arms around it and completely understand it, but I've tried to just keep it very simple for the purposes of this evening. I'm happy to answer questions, but I think that you all have done a great job getting to this point of organizing yourselves, and you've made a lot of progress in the last year.
So now that some of you maybe have been wondering what some of us have been doing in the last year, and you can see that this is what we've really been working on and why we really feel strongly that we want to conserve this piece of property and hopefully some other properties, so there's a big area of conserved land right there where you see it. So what questions do you have? Laura?
Marianne, I have a question about I'm not sure if I understand correctly. It seems to me that phase one is pretty well, not complete, but heading into the final stages of conservation.
We're working on that. We're trying to cover all the bases. We've got a purchase and sale agreement. We're beginning to talk to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. We've been talking with Joan Weir for a long time. All of those things are coming together, but it will be at least another year, I think, before we achieve it.
What remains is getting the sum of money for, and how much is that?
The price
Yeah.
for this piece is $200,000.
200,000 for the one that you have to purchase.
Right, which is lower than, by a percentage, lower than its appraised value? Yeah.
And the grant?
So that helps, that helps with us getting grants, because that's like a donation. So the Wilsons have said, because you're going to do this, they feel strongly, the Wilsons have been great, and they feel strongly about this. Many of you maybe saw the article in yesterday's paper. And today we should just note, while I think of it, that it's Conrad Wilson's 98th birthday? Pardon? He would have been 98 today.
And it was so amazing, Marianne, when you came to Alex and me and said that this evening was on December 6th.
Right.
My mouth just dropped open.
Really?
No, I mean, Conrad would just be thrilled.
Yeah.
I've been sitting here thinking about him, and it brings me to tears, really.
That's great. That's great.
And
Yeah.
how much would the grant be for?
The grant would be for a portion of that, and I think for this would be $140,000, that the possibility that we could get from that one source, but we're looking at many sources at this point. So we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. We'll be looking at a lot of different ways of doing it.
And the price for the phases 2, for phase 2, is there a price tag on that one?
Well, that's pretty early on.
Yeah.
I mean, the owner threw out in an email of 450,000, which is, when you break it down to the per acre price, it's pretty similar
All that.
to the per acre on the Wilson parcel.
But there might be some possibilities here that we've talked about, that this is across the river, but it's beautiful fields.
No, that is, well, it's,
Yeah,
It's on the east side of the river.
it's on this side of the river.
Right.
You have to ford the river to get to those pieces.
those fields are inaccessible from any road.
But there's these fords, so that the people that go over there and work on those fields go through the water.
And there's pipeline across the river.
There's pipeline, yeah, there's maple pipeline. In fact, there's maple pipeline that goes onto the Wilson property that, I don't know how that happens to be, but anyway, that would be a really fast drop of that, that sap down into,
So that land is actually listed right now. You can look it up because it's listed as part of the whole Winchester Stables property. The listing pretty much focuses on the buildings on the other side of the river, but it's on the market. But Frank Mercedes has carved us out of the listing, so for now we can deal with him on just this side of the river, part of the parcel. You know, it kind of depends on the market. And if somebody wants to buy the whole thing, then we may be out of luck. On the other hand, that person may be another Conrad. So, you never know.
No such thing as another.
this is a neighbor who knew Conrad, said there's no such thing as another Conrad, so that's, Don.
I know the present land is in the Brookline,
Yes,
so this whole thing that we're talking about.
This is in
going to include
Brookline.
The Brookline part.
Pardon? Yes,
which is
yes.
the part up on top.
Yeah.
Where the pinnacle is.
Yeah, there's about 40 acres in Brookline. Isn't that right?
That's 50.
50? Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And isn't the top where the monument is, that's in Brookline?
It is.
And if you come from Putney, that is a pinnacle, that stone pile up way up on top. Where the old time, there used to be a coffee can in there, and you could write a note to people that.
And that, and this one? The one that you saw in the pictures?
No,
Oh, okay.
I don't think it's as tall, it used to be, they said it's tall as your head,
Yeah.
not as tall now, but it's,
So there's a similar thing then.
but that's where you gotta, if you didn't know trees grow up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know, wonderful view.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, something we didn't mention about that phase 2 land, if you could go back to that, since you asked. In addition, this little parcel of land around the power lines in Brookline is owned by Velco or Transco,
Yeah,
technically. As part of their acquisition of the right-of-way, they purchased that land, and it does have an easement on it already, that it remains as a deer yard. So that's perfect. I mean, because it's again, it increases the total acreage of protected land by another 40-odd acres.
So can you just show us where Winchester Stables is?
Yes.
It's on the other side of the
Yes.
river.
These fields here.
No, I don't think so. I think it's way up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Under the-
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So the buildings of the actual stables would be right in here. In these
And
fields.
then the Green Iron Bridge to Brookline is further upstream.
Yeah, that's up here. Yeah. We could look on the bigger map, but yeah, that's a little bit. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes.
Mary Ellen, I presume this property is in the current use program, and my question is, if it's conserved, could it continue to be in the current use program?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, those can always be concurrent.
And yes.
Earlier, you indicated the grants would cover not just purchase price, but ongoing annual maintenance of the property. What's the ballpark budget that you're projecting for annual maintenance?
haven't actually
Okay.
scratched that out yet, but it's, I mean, mainly it's the taxes. Right? And I think the grant, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board wants to see, you know, that we can continue to pay the taxes if we buy it.
So what's
Well, and
the
there's
usual with that?
also, there are also project costs, as I was mentioning earlier, putting a conservation easement in place, because it's a legal document, there is legal staff time that needs to go into that, field work, mapping. We also collect a stewardship endowment contribution at the time that a project closes, and so that assures that there will always be resources for someone to go out and monitor the property over the years. So that all gets packaged into the whole project cost. So it's acquisition plus project costs. And we're all still working on that budget. But it's a huge, significant step to get that purchase and sales agreement today, because you have to have a signed contract to go before VHCB. So Chuck, they've gotten that far. So
And we've got our first appointment with the HCB on Monday.
great. Not bad.
Yeah. Other questions or comments?
Comments. I know there's many people here who have walked on this land and have seen other things.
Charlie? Okay.
Well, aside from the mysterious mound, there are a lot of stone walls. And has
Lots.
anyone done an inventory of stone walls, foundations? Do we know any of the history between the building of the mound and current day? And there was supposition about
There is,
grazing land, but
there is
We
a,
don't know, we don't know any of that history very well at all, but there are a couple of cellar holes. One is at the top where, one is where the power lines cross each other.
one is right here.
There's a cellar hole there. There's an enormous stump of a tree that's no longer there that clearly wasn't there when the house was there. So that's quite an old cellar hole. The stone walls tend to be in pretty good shape.
A lot of them are mapped also.
A lot of them are mapped, there's a lot of corners. There's also another stone structure that is kind of oval shaped and is kind of tumbled down, but it made the state archaeologists very intrigued to see photos of that.
I only have word of mouth history of this land and area, so I can't even tell you what the real sources are. But where are we again? So Camp Arden Road. Camp Arden Road is a relatively new road. Access to this area. Can we, maybe the photograph?
This one?
I don't know if that's a better. Oh, it's hard to see.
We have to turn the light out.
Yeah, no, let's not turn the light out. But,
Okay. You keep talking, I'll see if I
okay.
have another one.
So, for those of you familiar with the roads in Dummerston, the Hague Road runs. There you go, reorient yet. Yes, Green Mountain Camp and Hague Road.
Hague Road runs here in Dummerston.
Yep. So Hague Road runs here. It's named the Hague Road because it connected Center and East Dummerston to the Hague, which was this neighborhood. And it actually, it does run through the woods right to here to connect to Camp Arden Road here. Camp Arden Road along the river wouldn't have been there until we had enough flood control to keep that from flooding. I don't know the actual dates. You may know a little more on, but so there was actually quite a community here in the 1700s, and there was a schoolhouse for that neighborhood that obviously isn't there anymore. There was also a graveyard that apparently was dug up and moved. It wasn't far from your house.
Yeah, we can't find it.
It's not there. Part of it was actually a Townsend historian told my father that those graves were actually moved. I don't know.
Really?
So there was actually there were quite a few houses, homesteads, farms, and the community and it was kind of isolated because of the river and the mountain. You couldn't go along the river because that would all be flooded, and to get anywhere else you had to go up quite steep and over high ground.
I believe, I think it was your dad mentioned to me once that a lot of Camp Alton was under dairy farm about 100, 120 years ago. So I would imagine even end of the 19th century, a lot of the land which is now forested was probably open.
Oh yeah, hence why there's stone walls in the woods. Yeah, sheep and dairy. So, was that your question? Because that's my answer.
Yes.
What is the Yale Forest?
The Yale School of Forestry owns some pieces of land that they got in various ways. Bill, you know more about the Yale forests. Could you answer that?
Well, there are two properties that are owned by Yale. And one is on the west side of the West River, just roughly opposite the Wilson property. And I don't remember the acreage. Sizable property.
200 acres, I think.
It's not conserved. The other parcel is about 69 acres off East-West Road. And that is conserved. That has remained totally naturally intact forever. There never can be any dwelling on it. Interesting story on that one. Bob Kroll, who was a publisher that some of you know of, owned that 69-acre parcel. And he just hold it.
I'm just doing my job. Ignore me.
He wanted to have a property that remained natural and not ever got forested, never got managed for forestry uses. So he put a forever wild easement on that 66 acres. Actually, there's a third parcel adjoining that belongs to Yale, and that is not conserved, but the forever wild parcel is. That's the first property that the Yale School of Forestry allowed an easement on. They really aren't keen on easements, and especially forever wild easements. But Bob Kroll, who was shall we say, a strong donor of Yale, persuaded them to put that easement on that property. So there we are.
In the Yale School of Forestry, students come to these properties from, I think, about once a year to various educational activities.
No, that was the Alexander property that you're talking about.
Right.
Down below.
Right, the Alexander property, and you told me, I think, that there was a couple that lived there, there was a house that burned down, but the couple used to do laundry for people and then take it down the hill in a wagon and then wait for somebody to pick them up to take them into town.
Or they walked, they didn't get picked up.
If they walked
I mean, they went all over town with the wagon.
Yeah.
And he died in the fire.
Yeah. He died in the fire.
Complications of the fire.
Yeah, the cellar hole and remnants of the buildings were over there.
Mariella,
Yes.
would there hunting be available on the
Yes.
200-acre parcel?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Will you be posting tonight's materials on your website?
It will be on BCTV, and that's a good idea. We can put it on our website, sure.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. That's a very good idea. Thanks for reminding me.
What's the website?
Pardon?
What's
The
the
website
website?
is
greenmountainconservancy.org.
greenmountainconservancy.org. Anything else? Yeah, Bill.
How many properties are there between the Wilson property and the Putney Mountain Ridge line?
Depending on which way you go, there's one or several. And so there's various, actually, Roger, where's Roger? Yeah, from this property to get to the Putney Mountain trails, how many properties are in between? There's several.
Well, I guess as a minimum it's 2 to get to Conti, but that's, whether you can get that is questionable. Who knows?
Yeah.
You know, that might be doable. There's another route based on the maps. It looks like we need 5 or 6. So those are the 2 apparent alternatives.
There's several, 5 or 6 or 2. Okay. Just to be clear.
But if you can get through to the road up there is a 5-spur road.
Yeah.
The Bennett Road?
Get to the road and then
Yes.
walk the road for a little ways.
Yes.
Back then.
Yes. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Is there anyone here who could talk about the plants of the land?
Pass.
Specifically American ginseng,
Yes.
which I read.
It's there.
Okay. Anyone know any more about it, like specifics, population?
Could you answer this, Patty?
Alex.
Or Alex?
Do you want to say anything about that, Alex?
I've seen one plant of it, and it's a secret. I could tell you about where it is, and it was on an area that was impacted by the widening of the power line. It wasn't the Velco line. It wasn't on that corridor, but it was right outside of it. So the light conditions would have changed, and I'm not sure that's still a viable habitat for it.
Other questions? Hector?
Assuming we're successful and this is up and going, we're hoping that people are going to visit and experience this land. Where are they going to park?
Well, we have one space for 2 cars. We'll have to work on that. But I'm hopeful, various of us have talked about taking some beginning hikes up there, in the spring, so that more and more people can get up there. And hopefully, I'm anxious to follow Roger's trail. I haven't followed that yet.
Yeah,
It's wonderful up there. It's just...
That's one of those, that would be a good problem to have. Not enough parking. We haven't really imagined that we were that far along today. But I think that I can see places where we can squeeze cars in without making it having to do a massive excavation.
Yeah. Yes.
Sort of along those lines, being someone who lives on Camp Art, pretty much right there.
Yeah, you're right by the...
The idea of let's have a big parking lot, let's make this a destination. I mean,
that's not.
I frankly have some concerns about this becoming a destination.
No, that's not something we're going to work toward.
So you were sort of joking.
No. The problem is, we can count on another heiress or another family like the Wilsons to just hold the land. In which case, nobody will come and, Camp Arden will be nice and quiet. Or we can say that's too big a risk. We can recognize that, the era of robber barons is kind of fading, and large parcel landowners seem to be a thing of the past, and we're seeing large parcels getting fragmented up as families split them up or sell them. And so we take the initiative to hold it ourselves, but if we use public funds, we really have to make it a public land. And so that's pretty much, the trade-off.
Yeah.
If we're going to take that step, I think we really have to recognize that hunting, we don't actually have to, apparently we still can take funds from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board and post the land. I didn't realize you could do that.
But post it...
We probably won't, because we feel that in accepting public funds or grant money, that's probably something that, we need to make it available to the public if they're supporting us. So So hiking and hunting, we need to make that accessible to people. The nature of this particular land, even more so than Black Mountain, I don't think it's going to attract that many. So I think we're fortunate in that sense that Roger's tried his best with the land as it is to make it something that somebody can hike, but you've probably done some exploring yourself. I mean, it's really rugged terrain, and we're going to be making a footpath, not something that is going to be wide enough for everything else. So
obviously, worse alternatives. I'm just
Yes.
getting an
Yes.
idea
Yes.
for how much is this going to be
Well, what I'm trying to say
promoted
is-
as opposed to just being available.
Right, well, that's a balance we're going to have to strike. But I recognize the tension, is what I'm saying. As a person who owns land on Camp Arden Road and has lived and will live on Camp Arden Road, I have the same
Enjoys the fact
concern.
it's a dead-end road with
Absolutely.
no reason for anyone to go down there.
Right.
But I also recognize that the only reason we've been so lucky is by accident and by the generosity, essentially, of some wealthy families to simply sit on the land. And I don't think we can expect that into the future. I don't think New England can expect that going into the future. So we're already seeing that the trend is towards chopping up these larger parcels. So,
But I think we'll do everything we can to mitigate the kinds of issues you're talking about.
Well, just in terms of that particular issue, are there other entry points into the land? Other places in Brookline, for instance, where there could be some pull-out to park?
That's something we have to look at. I don't think we have an answer for that.
From my walk around, I'd say probably not.
I mean, if we look at that map and the Phase 2 lands, so far, none of those parcels have road access in Newfane or Brookline. So it would be, a right-of-way kind of situation if we could come up with one off of Putney Mountain Road.
Laura.
I was just going to say, Marianne, that based on our experience in Newfane, at the Newfane Town Forest, where they're very popular hiking trails, if there's more than one car in the parking lot at a time, we go and, who's that? So, we were required to have parking spaces by the town for, I think, 5, and it was a big issue. And they weren't necessary, but in any case.
So that's comforting.
Good.
Yeah, it's well used, but it's not overused.
We promised 8:30 and we're at 25 of. I also was, if any of you aren't on the list, if you haven't gotten notices and you want to get notices, you can sign up to get email notices of meetings and activities depending on what's going on. I try to keep people updated through emails or others of us.
Everybody the next event.
Pardon?
The next event, December 12th?
Well, that's a Conservation Commission event.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's different. But the Dummerston Conservation Commission is having a logging presentation with Sam Schnesky. Yeah, anyway, somebody else say it. Sam Schnesky. How do you? Anyway, is that right? With a presentation on logging, and that's going to be at the Grange Hall on next Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. So, but we all have tried to keep everybody up to date. So if you're on the list, you've probably been getting, depending on what's going on, 3 or 4 paragraphs about what we're up to. So, and you can always be in touch with us.
I think your updates are great.
Pardon?
I think your updates are great.
Oh, good. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right.
Thank you for coming
Thank
out.
you.